So the grossest travel story that I ever had was when my son and I were living in Lomé, Togo, and I was working at the American school there. And we used to ride motos. And so my son had his motorcycle helmet that he would, as kids do, just throw wherever. So he'd come home from school and he'd just throw it on the couch, or he'd be playing with the dogs and he'd just throw it on the ground, or he'd leave it on the ground while he was playing at soccer. And I didn't think too much about this until one day he started having really bad headaches. When I say one day, let's make it 1 week. So he started having these really bad headaches, and ibuprofen isn't working. And he just, like, every day he's like increasingly in more pain. At first I thought it was malaria, which is super, super normal in West Africa. Even taking the malaria pills, Orion must have gotten malaria like 2 or 3 times. So at first I thought it was that. But he usually, when he had malaria, he would have a headache for a little while, and then he'd go out and he'd play and be fine. And this time it was obvious that he wasn't getting better. So I took him to the doctor. Um, and it was interesting. I don't remember what it was that already made me think of this, but I had been reading articles about like the botfly. And I asked the doctor, and I was like, this isn't one of those things, is it? Like the botfly. And he was like, no, no, no. We're in West Africa. That's an East Africa thing. That's not a problem. But they did do a blood test on him, and they found out that he didn't have malaria, but he did have infection. So they sent us home with antibiotics. They did say, since his head was hurting and it was itching a lot, and you could see little like he had scratched, so there were like little red spots on his head. And so they said, the doctor was like, it would be easier if he didn't have all this hair. You could like have a better look. So that day while I was at school teaching, the um, our nanny slash housekeeper, Mina, she took him to go get his haircut, and they shaved off all of his hair. When they did that, I could see, and so when I came home, I could see on his head that he was in pain because there was like this pus coming out of these wounds. They basically like looked like these like giant, like worst zit that you've ever had, right? And when I saw this, like, my son does not like me touching his skin. I was a pimple popper when I was a kid, but he was not having any of that, especially not from me. But this time, I was like, Orion, I know that you don't like me doing this, but like, there's a very, very solid white, like hard piece of pus. Like, your head hurts because you have this like hard, like white head there. Like, we need to squeeze that out. He was having none of that. Obviously, he already had a headache. He was only about six or, I want to say 6 or 7. So he did not want me touching his head. There were these white, hard little pusses coming out of these wounds, and he did not want to be touched. But I told him, I was like, we got to do this. Like, I'm sorry, we got to do it. So I asked Mina to come over, and I was like, grab some tissue. Like, I'm going to start squeezing, and I need you to just like get this, like wipe this pus away. So there we are. And he's sitting in front of me. I'm standing up at the couch. She's got her tissues all ready. And I start squeezing and squeezing and squeezing this wound on the top of his head. And I'm squeezing and squeezing. And like, the pus just keeps coming and coming and coming. And then I finally like get all the pus out. And Mina looks at the tissue and she's like, Mom, that's not pus. And we looked, and there was this giant white, fat, caterpillary like larva. My son had mango fly. So, mango fly is a fly that likes to lay its eggs in like wet cloth and stuff. So that's why I brought up the motorcycle helmet in the beginning. Is we're assuming my son had just like left that around and it had gotten onto the sweaty motorcycle helmet and laid its eggs, and he put that on his head because he had 7 more of these. Dude, I was so grossed out, guys. But this was my mom moment. These are the things you have to do as a mom. And I was just like, all right, Orion, we're going in. And once he knew that there were like actual like larvae, like these worm like things in his head, oh, let me tell you, he sat very, very still. And we went through and we squeezed each and every one of those out as far as we could. Um, there were like 2 that wounds that we couldn't get anything out of. And we ended up learning that like you could like spread Vaseline on them and that sort of thing. So that is my grossest story, and my story about the most motherly love I have ever had with the mango fly in Togo. Tell me your grossest story in the comments.